Hello, everyone. My name is Marija Marić, and I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Luxembourg. I would first like to thank the organizers for the invitation to join this workshop today. It's a real pleasure to be part of a discussion on such an important topic. Today, I will shortly present fragments from our contribution to the project Luxembourg in Transition, Spatial Visions for the Zero Carbon and Resilient Future of the Luxembourg Functional Region, which was launched by the Ministry of Energy and Spatial Planning in 2020. University of Luxembourg, together with its project partners, which are listed here on this slide, was one of the 4 teams that recently completed third and the last phase of this competition. Our last contribution, titled A Guide on Repairing Commercial Zones, outlined the governance and territorial planning strategies for the environmental, social, and spatial transformation of commercial zones in Luxembourg, and was grounded in the principles of no net land take, like all our previous projects in this consultation. The focus of our project was Fürth, the largest commercial zone in Luxembourg, positioned between Luxembourg City and Esch-sur-Alzette. Created together with the construction of the A4 highway in the 1970s, Fürth, as well as other commercial zones, represents an illustrative example of unsustainable planning practices in Luxembourg. A car-centered, sealed concrete island with no inhabitants, Fürth appears as a kind of a monument to the broken territory. But, and this is important to note, this state of things is not just a consequence of the poor planning practices from the past. Instead, only during the course of the work of our project, next to the construction of a new gas station in Fürth, a new gigantic automobile center known as the Motor City started to develop by the Giorgetti real estate group just around Fürth, spreading over 53 hectares of land. The practices of continuous growth and land sealing made Fürth, among other things, also an important heat island. As this diagram, produced by our colleague Jürgen Jung and his team, shows, Fürth is this burning red dot in the center, which gets around 5 degrees Celsius warmer than the rest of its surroundings. Fürth, however, is not an isolated case, and commercial zones are not a minor territorial phenomenon. Together, they form a surface almost as large as Luxembourg City. So, looking from this point of view, our project started with the question, how do we transform commercial zones into sustainable living environments? Beyond techno-fix solutions, what are other ways to reimagine our futures as environmentally, socially, and spatially more just? I will now play a short video produced as part of our project that opens up on our design approach and imaginaries for Fürth in 2035.
250 years ago, when Joseph Johann von Ferraris mapped Luxembourg, there were small towns surrounded by organic agriculture and embedded into streams of woods and clean water. This uninterrupted landscape, made of trees and bushes surrounding the urban archipelago, is now an uninterrupted flow of cars and roads, with fractured ecosystems finding their place in the niches of a growing sprawl. Since its construction in the 1970s, the A4, the most used motorway in the country, notorious for its traffic jams, divides the territory of Luxembourg, fragmenting the landscape through urbanisation. Its old friend, the commercial zone, was and still is there, in an immediate proximity, to fulfil all the needs of a car driver: free parking, easy fueling, and big-time shopping. One such commercial zone is Fürth. With its 6,200 parking places, 0 inhabitants, and 23,000 daily visitors coming in with their cars, Fürth is a monument to the broken territory of Luxembourg. As such, it continues to flourish. From a new gas station that has been built just over the course of this project, the plans to extend the highway, to the construction of entirely new city, so-called Motor City, is dedicated solely to the car. Here, the question becomes, how does one approach this problem? Does the solution lie in fixing the motorway by extending it, by making the car flow smoother and faster? Or do we need the opposite approach, to reduce long-distance mobility and shorten travel distances, thereby making the car itself obsolete? More than a decade ago, in 2021, this started to change. It took some time, but that's okay. We all needed a deep breath before getting into the real work of repair. The third lane of the A4 motorway, foreseen already in 2021, was made accessible to e-buses. The groundwork for the arrival of a tram system started, set to run in parallel with the construction of reusable structures that were positioned between the highway and commercial zone. These were designed to reduce the presence of cars in Fürth. Trying to fit into the narrative of change, McDonald's went green, somewhat too literally, changing the colour of their logo and closing their drive-in. The capacity of e-buses connecting Fürth with other villages increased, and the construction of car parking started with the instalment of a transition lab. You might wonder, what's a transition lab? Well, looking from the outside, it's just a temporary structure on a parking lot, known for good parties and heated discussions. Looking from the inside, it's a place for exchange and experimentation, an incubator of concrete local transition projects, where questions around affordable housing, the right to the city, communal politics and environmental action could be found. With the repair everything approach, the old Batiself started its transformation into a material bank and a makerspace, giving a glimpse of a future project of circular economy. Some big boxes followed the wind of change, adapting their businesses and taking the opportunity of transition. Others tried to defy it. On the outskirts of Fürth, the fertile but forgotten land began to get activated, mainly through the project of solidary agriculture. In the late 1920s, with the arrival of the tram to Fürth, things began to accelerate. Fewer cars meant fewer need for parking, and reusable structures started to get repurposed, partially into co-working spaces. It became clear that the McDonald's greenwashing strategy would not work out. The shift towards local food production pushed the company to sell the plot, allowing for the building to be redeveloped and transformed into a restaurant. What used to be a busy street now turned into a public space for pedestrians and cyclists, which could only be crossed by e-buses. Fürth said goodbye to the car. And remember the transition lab? Well, with its original role now fulfilled, it became a civic centre and a cooperative housing project, which, next to other co-housing and social housing projects in Fürth, now hosted almost 5,000 people. The ground floors were alive with different kinds of public activities, and the rooftops agriculturally productive, collecting and providing energy to the new and ever-growing city. Fürth has become a repair district, growing far beyond the building of the former Batiself into an urban landscape whose economy is now grounded in the politics of maintenance and care. Even the most persistent big malls started to question their business models. What were scattered gardens now became an emerging food belt, with organic vegetables grown and eaten by the growing population. Today, no one really remembers the A4 motorway. In its place stands a lively urban avenue. There are still electric cars, but even with them, the reusable structures are getting reconfigured, or shall I say reused, into different commercial and public amenities, such as this public library. The remaining car parking spaces between buildings are getting unsealed and greened, allowing for water to be absorbed in the soil and nature to thrive not just outside, but also in the new city. Perimeter blocks, now filled with new housing, are starting to form local communities, with inner parks and shared co-working, repair and other communal facilities. There is life in Fürth, sometimes even too much of it. At this point, even the last shopping malls have quit, giving space to more sustainable economies and public infrastructure such as this school. The green belt of private, community and solidary gardens allows humans and non-humans alike to interact. Complemented by food markets, sports fields and learning facilities, the landscape has become a social project. Although the green belt of Fürth did not fulfill ambitions of full self-sufficiency, it did allow for the emergence of fun, with people gathering and enjoying the process of growing and sharing food. Can we imagine a green Fürth? But not the kind of green as McDonald's imagined it when they changed the colour of their logo, trying to fit to the narrative. Can we imagine a sustainable living in a once fossil-driven commercial zone of Luxembourg? The transition we propose is technically sound, economically meaningful, ecologically necessary, and socially a gain for the people. It is imaginable and doable. Now, when do we start repairing this broken territory?
Okay, so let's now move to the how of the project. Learning from the specific conditions of FUDs is our primary site of research. We developed a guide which offers concrete and realistic steps for the transformation of commercial zones in Luxembourg. This guide, of course, does not have a tendency to be a generic nor universalist planning document. It rather offers a toolbox for approaching a complex task of transition that cuts across different planning spheres and practices. Here, we started with an obvious question: how to make a commercial zone car-free? Our guide proposes 4 steps for de-carring commercial zones. First is connecting the zone to the public transportation system, introducing infrastructure for e-car sharing, developing soft infrastructures, and transforming the road network into public space. Now, going back to FUDs, this means concrete strategies such as the introduction of the tram, which is already being planned for 2028, as well as an efficient e-bus system that would connect the zone with other villages and towns which are not on the tram route. This is accompanied by new infrastructure for e-car sharing, as well as the introduction of cycling and pedestrian paths, which would also be linked to the regional soft mobility network. Finally, we propose to transform the inner road network into a system of public spaces, squares, and pedestrian streets. These public spaces would be designed as platforms for social activity, while some of them could also serve as retention bases in case of heavy rain. Making FUDs car-free would open up an entirely new set of possibilities, leading to the next question in the process: how to use the newly available surfaces. Here, we proposed 4 steps: making use of roofs, building on parking areas, transforming the main road into an urban avenue, and changing the use of fossil era typologies such as garages, gas stations, and drive-ins. Although only 10% of the buildings in FUDs are feasible for overbuilding, still all new rooftops could combine greenery and photovoltaics, while the large existing hangars could support PVs, thus allowing transition to the clean energy production for local needs. Without cars, we will obviously and luckily not need parking anymore. Infamous for its 6,200 parking lots, FUDs will now stand in front of an enormous potential land, which would be partially unsealed and partially used for the construction of new affordable housing. Our project also proposed to integrate the motorway into the urban fabric of FUDs by turning it into an urban avenue, which will consist of 1 lane of cars in each direction, 1 lane for e-buses and taxis, and 1 lane for the tram. This will not only add to the urbanity of the newly emerging city, but would also generate new floor space. Fossil-centered typologies, perhaps most symbolically gas stations, would be transformed into repair shops, co-working spaces, or get other public or commercial uses. By removing the car and building on newly available surfaces, we could transform FUDs into a city of 10,000 inhabitants without net sealing of new land. But in order to make FUDs a good place for living, we also need to think about the ways of introducing new activities to the site. How do we do that? Here are the 4 steps we propose. First is establishing a transition lab. Second, bringing in new activities to the site. Third, diversifying them. And fourth, making existing structures carbon-free and repairable. One of the most apparent problems of FUDs is that nobody lives there. As such, it is a perfect tabula rasa for developers' visions of transition, but this is not what we want. We want the people who will live there to be able to envision and build their own environment. The transition lab would appear as a catalyst of change, whose role would be to stimulate people to organize themselves into communities and cooperatives. Our project is also grounded in urbanism of proximity. To achieve that, we suggest to diversify the uses in FUDs from monofunctional big box urbanism to the multi-grained environment with spaces for office work, craftsmanship, small-scale commerce, markets, housing, schools, cinemas, and everything else urban life is made of. Mixed use does not only mean mixing the housing with work or public activities. It also means mixing the population, the older with the younger, more privileged with the less privileged. We believe that Luxembourg is in an urgent need for affordable and participatory housing. Through public rights, former parking areas would be allocated to the communities and public housing companies at a fair rent. In our project, we envisioned 40% of cooperatives, 40% of social housing, and 20% of private housing developments in FUDs. The unsustainable economy that FUDs is based on today would also need to be transformed. Here, repair appears as our main thread, both in terms of repairing nature and landscape, repairing economies, and finally, repair as an economy in its own right. In other words, could we imagine FUDs as a repair district? And if yes, what would that mean? The fourth part of our strategy centers on the question of renaturalization. First, we propose to unseal land between the buildings, create a green belt and community gardens, make the city and rooftop greener, and provide nature-based solutions for stormwater management. Out of 98 hectares site, 82 hectares are sealed and 32 hectares, or a third of the site in FUDs, can be unsealed even with ambitious plans to provide housing for 10,000 people. By unsealing land, we would increase porosity, reduce stormwater runoff and air temperatures, and increase biodiversity and carbon uptake. We also propose to create a landscape belt around FUDs and connect it to the green areas within. The belt would accommodate different open space typologies, including community gardens, playgrounds, sports fields, and trees. It would also function as a buffer zone that could limit sprawl and expansion of the area. Trees in urban areas are important for climate change adaptation because they provide shade and help cool cities down at night. They also act as a carbon sink and provide habitat. The forested green belt around FUDs would connect with the forest network of the surrounding landscape. Green stormwater infrastructure relies on plants and natural systems to manage stormwater and increase climate resilience. They reduce the flow of water into pipelines and also filter pollutants. This is particularly important since FUDs could transition to fully separated sewer and stormwater management, in which rainwater treated in this way could flow directly into the Kiemelbach. So, in summary, following these steps, a sealed island with more than 6,000 parking spaces and no inhabitants, which FUDs is today, could transform into a city of 10,000 inhabitants without any new net land ceiling before 2035. In other words, Luxembourg's most used motorway could be imagined as an urban avenue. Here, cars would still go through the site together with the tram, but priority would be given to pedestrians and bikes, which would be able to cross the avenue at several locations. The density of the surrounding buildings would provide active ground floor activities, whether they're commercial or more public. Similarly, what today serves as a busy roundabout in FUDs could become a public space shared by pedestrians, cyclists, and e-buses, which would connect FUDs to other surrounding villages. Here, asphalt could be replaced by a porous pavement, which could allow the soil to absorb the rain. An endless sealed surface, which we also saw in the previous presentation, could become a potential for building a living neighborhood with common renaturalized courtyards. The public space could be conceived like a basin, capable of retaining the water in case of heavy rains. Big box hangars and shopping malls could turn into hybrid functions like co-working spaces, repair shops, craft workshops for a wide range of different labor practices. And finally, what is today a broken and polluted nature could become a landscape belt to be used in different ways, from growing vegetables and fruits, sports and leisure, to ecological learning, or just exist as a space for biodiversity and cohabitation between humans and non-humans. To conclude, we started from the proposition that we have enough sealed land and space for further development if we succeed in introducing sufficiency in individual transport. Our project shows how only the mere act of taking the car out of the city, for instance, suddenly unleashes enormous land potential, as well as potential for the transformation of other spaces of the fossil age, such as garages, car parks, shopping centers, industrial parks, commercial zones, urban motorways, to name just some, as well as overbuilding of the existing buildings. As this image shows, the provision of new necessary housing and infrastructure could be thus achieved through inner densification of cities and main agglomerations and not villages, small villages and towns, and the making of a networked archipelago of urban islands. Every square meter of natural land should act as a carbon sink. Every open space in town and villages should be preserved, activated with different uses like urban forests, vegetable gardens with hedges, sports facilities, parks, and the like, and should be protected as urban sponges. Finally, no net land take is not just a question of land. It is also a question of governance, ownership, housing, mobility, energy, food, that need to be tackled across all social scales, from the individual to the community, and finally, a society as a whole. Thank you very much.